Very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's uLaw webinar. I kindly request you to use the phone numbers provided for better audio quality if you're actually using your computer for the audio. Now, today's webinar, under the topic of Law Office Matter Management, has been accredited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, and New Brunswick. The title is Law Office Matter Management, and it's for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits. And like every other uLaw webinar, today's webinar has a specific agenda. We're going to be talking about the important steps that a legal office would have to take in order to create a file or a matter in legal lingo towards not only moving that file forward in terms of the next steps, the logical next steps, and the life cycle of that matter, but how do I, or as a legal firm, move that matter or file to the next steps, towards the logical next steps, but also keeping Law Society compliance in mind. Okay, so we're really going to talk about the different statuses, the different life cycles that a matter goes through, the different ways of addressing a matter or a file. We'll take some simple examples, the nuances of how you manage and create documents that extend and surround the use of this file and the creation of a specific matter, which could be for various different aspects of business, various different areas of practice, the treatment that you as a legal firm would take towards different files with different nuances, right? We'll talk about how you manage retainers as a legal firm, how best to adopt ways that you can provide compliance documents such as receipts and retainer letters, ensuring that you have a handle of managing, docketing, the disbursements, if and when applicable to that matter. And once you've completed, let's say, a life cycle of a matter, right from its retainer to ensuring that you've done the trust transfers and all, we'll talk briefly about the trust and general management in terms of how do you manage the journals, the ledgers, and the reconciliation documents that you're expected to manage and present at that time of an audit. Okay. We'll also talk about some of the other aspects of matter management and the documentation that goes along with it, including matter analytics and the fee book, which typically talks about the outstanding revenue or outstanding fees or any applicable AR that's pending for a particular matter. Once again, I repeat that today's webinar has been accredited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, and New Brunswick. So you kindly do request that you log into your individual websites and actually use the title Law Office Matter Management. Okay? So just a precursor to the whole file management is the first step, of course, is if legal file is being created, is for the firm to actually intake the client. And this is a standard process across all firms. Various sizes does not matter. It certainly is a first step towards creating that file because that file is actually created for a specific client. So as part of a client intake, the top 3 or 4 things to keep in mind is ensuring that you have a process and a management style to be able to deal with the different recording of the consultations and the calls that you have, whether that's a prospective new client, a client that's looking to retain you, or even if it's just a ghost client that's actually given you information about themselves. Okay? Once you have created that client, and I'm going to go through the slide real fast because just setting the context of what it takes to manage a file or a matter, which is really the bigger aspect of today's webinar. So from a client intake perspective, one of the most important steps that a legal firm would have to take is ensuring that you do the conflict checking for any conflicts of confidential information in representing this prospective client. So it's a process where you actually scan your files for any repetition of a similar name, if there's any parties involved with that similar name, any matters that have been created for a similar name, even to the point where it could be sounds like. So once you've actually done the conflict check, you've made sure that there are no conflicts, or at least you're aware of the conflicts, so you can make an informed decision about the next step. And let's assume that you've done that and there's no conflict in representing that individual or that client. A very important step is to ensure that you, through a retainer or an engagement letter, determine the collateral for fees, the actual document that binds a formal agreement between the client and your legal firm, right? That is what we call as either as a retainer letter or an engagement letter. So again, for that file, it's important that the retainer letter and the engagement letter is the one that binds the formalities between the two parties or the parties involved, between your firm and the other parties that you're signing up with. If it's a real estate purchase, that could be joint retainers. So of course, the retainer agreement need to keep in mind that there could be multiple individuals involved in that retainer agreement. If there is no retainer involved, where there's no trust money involved, of course, that becomes an engagement letter where you clearly outline the obligations of your client. Very important that you do outline that in terms of the payment terms, in terms of obligations of communication, how often and what you expect from the client as a response time, and also commit to what your legal firm would adhere to in terms of timelines, communication channels, and expected cycles for invoices and documents. Okay? So once you've created that client and once you've assured there are no conflicts, one of the immediate next steps that you would do is to actually create a file. So there's a logical encapsulation of the work that needs to be accomplished for the specific client. Okay? So it's really about what is the nature of this business, what is this file about, and making sure that you and the firm and everybody within the firm appreciate and understand as to the components that go behind representing this client. Okay? And there's a quick question around, again, the title for those who just joined us. The name of today's webinar is Law Office Matter Management. And it's actually available in the email that we've sent you as well. So it's Law Office Matter Management. It's 1 hour CPD credits of professionalism hours. So when you talk about managing a matter or a file, some of the important aspects of that is ensuring that there's an organizational standard for file keeping. A good example is ensuring that the file number or the matter number that's being used is unique. It's again unique to the point where even if it's for the same client, the numbers don't repeat. So again, just reiterating that statement, a very important first step in file management is ensuring that each file number is unique. And those file numbers are created for specific files and matters and not for a specific client. Especially if you're doing this the manual way, you want to make sure that even if there are multiple matters for the same client, that you have multiple unique file numbers that pertain to the specific context of those individual matters. And then when it comes to the next steps, once you have created that file, maybe it's easier for you to tag the nature and business of that particular matter, the agreed upon rates, the agreed upon style of how you would docket or charge the client for the service that your firm offers, keeping in mind that the retainer or the engagement letter should also outline all of the disbursements or the expenses rather on the client's behalf that your firm would actually pay for certain firms actually have a disbursement chart that they outline almost every specific disbursement that they anticipate having during the execution of that file. Examples such as fax. Every time that legal firm uses the fax machine, they're going to say, we're going to charge you 40 cents a fax. Or it could be photocopies. Or it actually could be the mileage that a lawyer or a legal representative travels. It could be specific lawyers or assistant travel mileage fees as well. Right? There's going to be many different disbursements as part of that particular file that's documented in the retainer agreement, signed and agreed upon, and then executed on top of that. So once that retainer or engagement letter is completed, then you move on to actually executing it, which is then docketing as per plan, dispersing as per plan, and then very importantly, invoicing as per plan so that there are no surprises to your client. And we did speak about this earlier, ensuring that the file management, one of the top things is to make sure that they're unique, they're separated out even if it's for the same client, is easy to search and organize, and of course allows you for cross-indexing, which is an important aspect of your conflict checks. A brief introduction, of course, to a retainer agreement. I'm sure everybody who's in this webinar today has either seen a retainer agreement or is in the process of drafting one, or someone who is seasoned has many such samples that they use for various different types of matters. But of course, if this is new to you, and if you're just getting started out, some of the important takeaways for you to keep in mind is ensuring that in that retainer or engagement letter that you do have the nature and scope of the matter, ensuring that very much outline the responsibilities of your client, ensuring that you do document clearly the scheduled fees and course of representation, and of course the method and frequency of your communication with the client. Okay? Before we jump into this slide of which specifically talks about the disbursements, one of the first things that you would do is ensuring that you've clearly outlined how you'd go about docketing. So there are certain clients that do billable time. So whatever time they put in, they're going to charge them for it. So if you've determined that, let's say $400 or $150 per hour is your fee, then if you actually spend 1 hour doing a specific task, or let's say an initial client intake meeting, there could be a visit to the court, this could be document drafting, whatever the task they may be, you may end up docketing that and charging them by the hour if you agreed upon that. There are some files, whether it's based on the nature of the matter, the firm's experience, a differentiator pricing can sometimes be flat fee, which has either taxes included, sometimes taxes not included, could be fees and disbursements included, sometimes disbursements separated out. So there's quite a few nuances and combinations to how you could charge a customer for the service that you offer for that particular matter. So very important, not only for disbursements, but fundamentally for the fees, that you have a clear and well-documented and agreed upon fee structure, because that's one of the major areas where you get a lot of pushback, especially when an invoice is being generated. And if it's not being documented as well as communicated properly, that's one of the fundamental areas where we see customers push back with our clients' legal representatives. Right? Once you've agreed upon the fee structure, of course, disbursements, this is something that's very important for a law firm, because these are expenses that are incurred by the legal firm but are client-related expenses and hence are something that you can reimburse. So typically these are disbursements where expenses are paid on behalf of a client's file, such as a court fee or an application fee, could be the fax, could be all those other disbursements we spoke about, but it is specific to a file's need, where many times you're paying for it in advance, and then having to recoup that money through that invoice from that client. Types of disbursements include billable, unit rate, mileage, recovery of expense on actuals. And the key opportunity that a law firm has, especially if you're dealing with a trust account, is that for certain types of disbursements, you do have the opportunity to pay for it directly off the trust account if you've accounted for it in that initial retainer. And that's something that we recommend, of course, based on the nature of your business, nature of the particular matter. Those conditions vary. Okay? Just keep in mind when you do disperse, very important that you do record each and every detail about that disbursement so that it can make its way into that invoice, or whether that's trust-based or general-based shouldn't matter, but it's important that the information and the details of that disbursement, including any taxes that you may have paid, gets into that invoice so that you can then recoup that from your customer or recover from that customer. Okay. We spoke about how it's important for you to keep in mind the file management aspects, but also keeping in mind the compliance that governs the types of documents that are expected during, let's say, an audit. Okay? So some of the examples of compliance documents that the Law Society does ask for or may ask for in an audit include, of course, a client ID verification. There's a quick message from our audience member that there's a lot of beeping in terms of someone maybe trying to dial into the phone number. So for whatever reason, if you're not able to, this webinar is available and will be recorded for you to consume Monday. So if you're having some technical difficulties, we kindly request that you either disconnect from the phone and connect by the computer if that's easier. So thank you very much in advance for that. And I'm going to try and be a bit more loud if I can. Thank you. So one of the important compliance documents when you start with is the client ID verification. So making that as a process, whether it's yourself or your firm having to document it, very important. Okay. When we talk about client ID verification, it is either a driver's license, a passport, whatever document, legal official document that you had used to ensure that this is actually the true person that you're dealing with. So if it's Joe Smith, then you do get the Joe Smith's driver's license to make sure the name, address matches with who they're claiming to be. Okay? A client intake form is another important document that the Law Society talks about, where you can actually clearly capture all of the information that's important as capturing about the information that you get from the client, such as name, first name, last name, sometimes even a nickname or a AKA name, just the also known as name, which does make its way into certain court forms as information that's pertinent, a correspondence address as and when applicable, as well as phone number or email, again, if required. Moving along, auditors may sometimes ask you for a retainer letter that was involved or an engagement letter that was involved at the start of that file, making sure that you've been able to clearly outline roles, responsibilities, fee schedule, etc. So having that retainer letter as part of that file management, very important. Conflict check, ensuring that you have done the right step of ensuring that there's a conflict screening that's happened prior to taking that client in and creating a file. There's a specific Law Society document called the conflict check, which gives you the opportunity to document each and every aspect of that client. What did you do with the client conflict screening? Why and how did you determine that there were no conflicts in representing this client? And if there are any conflicts, what are the actions that you've taken? Have you passed this client along to another legal representative? Have you declined a retainer? Or knowing that there's a conflict, what did you do to resolve it before you created that file? So it's a very detailed document that sometimes it's appreciated if it's made as part of those set of documents. I do see someone's trying to log in a few times, and then unfortunately I'm not sure if they're getting disconnected. But if the phone number is not working, then of course I kindly request you to use your computer. And I'm going to, of course, try and mute the numbers, but I do apologize for that constant beeping. I'm not quite sure what happened there. After the conflict check and conflict resolution documents, one of the most important aspects of of file management, which is sometimes is not looked upon, are the non-engagement aspect to it, right? Ensuring that as part of a compliance, especially if it's a ghost client who's come in, given you some information, and then, of course, has disappeared, not engaging you in a matter or a file. So the non-engagement letter clearly outlines that your responsibility as a legal firm with that client has logically ended and that you no more have that responsibility, okay? Clearly stating that because enough information is not given to the legal firm, they've not retained you or given you any fees, that you don't have the obligation or the formal responsibility of representing the costs. Auditors may often also ask for invoices, showing them how have you invoiced so that the information with regards to the fees and the disbursements are clearly outlined, and more importantly, the numbers that were used to do trust transfers matches the invoice amounts as well, okay? Because that's what eventually ends up in a trust and general ledger or journal. Now, this is a typical life cycle within every file. Client intake, conflict screening, retainer letter, invoices, which include dockets and disbursements, trust transfers, and then finally closing out that letter or that file. And when you do close that file, there are, of course, certain documents such as the closure letter, could be the final statement of settlement accounts, a very important document that sometimes auditors may ask for. Okay, now that this file is closed, did you send your client a statement of accounts? A document that pretty much outlines the history of every touch point with that client, all the numbers involved. And depending on the nature of the business, depending on the nature of the file, if this is specifically an ongoing matter, then there are some other documents that you have to keep in mind. If it's especially a corporate matter that's been ongoing for several years, then a yearly update with the statement of account. In fact, for certain corporate accounts, our clients have also been seen sending quarterly updates with bill of cost summaries, okay? But one of the most important logical closures to a file, of course, is that of a closure letter with a statement of settlement accounts. A quick slide on, and this was something that we've dealt with in our previous webinars as well, is really ensuring that you as a legal firm have the appropriate documentation to support the channel and the timeline of how often and how you reach your client. Okay, this is a very important aspect of the communication channel. I'm going to try and see if I can resolve this beeping. I'm going to give it one more try. I do apologize and kindly request your patience. Okay. How often do I reach my client with regards to a specific file? Well, it's all based on what you've agreed upon in that retainer and or engagement letter. Okay. Certain files don't require you to reach out almost every week. You don't require to be reaching out every day. Some matters may require that. Okay, so it really comes down to the nature of the business, what's been agreed upon, and of course based on how busy you are as a legal firm and how you manage your time across multiple matters. But if this is an ongoing matter, then of course that's when the Law Society does recommend some best practices. Best practices recommendations such as we mentioned quarterly documents. The Law Society also recommends that having review sessions with clients on a quarterly basis allows both you and the client to be on the same page, answer any concerns or questions that both parties may have at that particular time, so that any resolution can be caught early on, whether that's invoice-based, whether it's correspondence-based, whatever may be the issue. Okay? And of course, the Law Society does recommend that on an annual basis that you do send them a statement of account. Not only is it sent during the closure of a file, but if this is an ongoing file, then on a yearly basis, just as a quick reminder of what's happened this past year with this particular file is a nice reminder to that client, because they know this is what's been done, this is still what's left in trust amount, and maybe you can also attach scheduled representation, court dates that are anticipated in the coming year. You can actually do that. And as part of that file management, important documents that you do send to the client. So there are certain documents that you generate for your own Law Society requirements as a part of being that legal firm, and there are certain documents that you send out to clients as well, right? What are those documents? Of course, the first document, we've said this a million times, so retainer and engagement letter, something that you send to your client, get them to sign upon it. Once it's available, one of the next immediate documents would be that of a receipt, especially if they paid for a retainer, sending them a retainer receipt, thanking them for the payment, acknowledging the mode and the amount that was paid. And then, of course, the logical next document would be that of an invoice, whether that's just letting them know that that's the amount you're going to withdraw from the trust, or asking them for a payment, or asking them for a top-up of the retainer. Whatever the end goal may be, sending that in an invoice really helps establish the formal way of documenting the effort and the expenses that you've incurred on behalf of that particular file. Again, I repeat, it's on behalf of the particular file and not specific to a client, because we have legal clients, legal professionals, law firms having to deal with multiple open matters for the same client. One could be a landlord and tenant issue, the other could be a criminal matter, right? It's important that any correspondence, the unique identifier of that is the file number or the matter number. Because the style of docketing, the style of the retainer, everything could change on a file-to-file basis. So, of course, you send the invoices, and then once the customer has made a payment, then you send them the appropriate receipts. A good habit to ensure that you send it to the client right away. And then we spoke briefly about the important closure documents, such as statement of accounts, quarterly review documents that could include your bill of costs, even your fee book. Another correspondence that you may constantly have with your client is reaching out for payment. This could be in the form of a phone conversation, email, sometimes chat, and always going back to the invoice, and the matter number becomes very important so that it's easy for you to talk to them specifically about a file. And a client fee book or an aging report sometimes helps, especially if this is an ongoing file with a corporate client or otherwise, and then they haven't paid you in more than 30 or 40 days or whatever is agreed upon, and if now you have to charge them some interest, then of course an aging report becomes very important to attach as part of that requisition. And as we approach the holiday season, from now till the end of the year, of course, there's going to be many opportunities for you to reach out to your clients. We recommend, of course, as uLawPractice, or we've seen this as a trend, of course, being able to send out a bit of a holiday wish or a joy, part of that branding, part of that top of their mind, where they remember working with their firm and hopefully would refer you to a friend or a colleague, right? Now, in certain jurisdictions and as part of certain file keeping, there could be certain court forms that are required to be generated. So we looked at many different types of documentation within a file, right? One is regarding to the relationship that a firm has with the client and all of the documents that you send your client. There are documentation based on your relationship with the law society as a legal professional in that province, having to adhere to their policies and rules and keeping in mind the best practices that they recommend and generating documents that are specific to those. Of course, there's the third aspect, which is more of business management, which we'll cover in a different webinar, but there's documents, of course, with regards to taxes paid, everything that you need to manage as a business. But another component that we're going to talk about now is specific to, again, certain matters and specific to jurisdiction, whether it's the province of Ontario, whether it's British Columbia, other provinces in the country. And what those are the aspect of filling out court forms with information about the client and all of the parties that are involved in that particular matter. Parties is a way of building a bit of a relationship tree between the client, yourself as being the legal representation of that client in a matter, and all of the other contacts or individuals that were involved in that matter, either opposing the client or otherwise. So a joint retainer is an additional party so that both names show up in retainer letters and all the agreements. It could be a plaintiff-defendant situation. So if you're dealing with a client who's the plaintiff, and then you may have a defendant, then the information of that defendant needs to be attached to that file or that matter as a party. It could be the situation of a landlord and tenant, where if you're representing the landlord, then the tenant or tenants could be the parties involved. And they could have their own legal representation, so they could have their own paralegals and lawyers, but they also become part of the parties involved in that matter. Now, there are, of course, two significant reasons why you would associate these individuals' contacts as parties in a file. One, of course, is to ensure that you build the conflict screening opportunities. So if there's a Joe Smith who's been associated as a defendant in a Peter Dobson file, then the next time you actually create a matter for someone called Joe Smith, it's imperative and it's important for you to know that the information on that conflict screening should bring Mr. Joe Smith's prior information of being a party involved in a file that you dealt with. That's very important. Okay? So that's one item. The second, of course, very important, is to be able to fill out these court forms. Now, typically, you would actually log in or get into the website of the individual provincial websites that have these forms, download these forms, either type them because they're Adobe documents or Word documents sometimes, or handwrite them, scan them, and make them part of the file. Certain practice management tools, such as uLaw do give you the capability to automate the filling out these court forms, depending, of course, on the area of practice. But important to keep in mind that these are also documents that are involved in that particular file. So a plaintiff's claim, ensuring that there's a eviction document, or maybe there's a simple divorce file or court document that's involved, whatever may be the nature of that file, needs to find its way into the file keeping document keeping within that matter. Now, last but not the least, as you continue down this path of creating the files and dealing with the day-to-day aspects of that file, once in a while, it's important that you also have a better understanding of the life cycle, especially when it comes to the numbers involved. We spoke briefly about the aging report, but staying on top of the matter, understanding the types of matters that are generating revenue for you, so just taking a bigger picture view sometimes, or even if you have or someone in your firm needs to follow up on any outstanding fees that haven't been paid or invoices that haven't been paid, then the analytics around it gives you a first-hand visual representation of that data so that you can take faster actions. So you have to deal with having to do multiple things at the same time. As we often talk about the operational, tactical, and the strategic investments our mind has to make in running a business, right? Whether it's an individual doing all these three tasks, or if you can afford to have individuals work for you, or if you're partnering with individuals who do take some of the share of these three different tasks, regardless, it's important that these three tasks be taken care of. At an operational level, you can also automate some of these operational tasks. Operationals could be intake, going through the whole flow of retainer, invoicing, docketing. The more tactical are something like the analytics, which gives you a better feel for which matters are giving you more revenue. Is it small claims? Is it criminal law? Is it family matters? Is it geographically spread? And then the more strategic thought processes around, based on that information, where do I invest my marketing? So for the upcoming 2020, do I invest my marketing more in a specific geography? Do I invest in a billboard? Do I invest in Google marketing? Do I invest in social media marketing? So that's the more strategic thought process. But what encompasses, I think, more or less the operational and tactical tasks do include the compliance nature as well. So compliance is an over-encompassing aspect of these three major tasks that a legal firm or a sole practitioner needs to keep in mind. And of course, the tools, software-based or otherwise, the process that you have, the individuals involved, and the methodologies that you follow enable you to not only concur with the Law Society guidelines, but also execute these three different tasks in a more efficient and timely manner. If you're more efficient and if you're timely, not only are you empowering your firm to be more successful, because you have that very fast and professional outlook in front of your client, your firm is also making money faster, so your aging is not as bad as it sometimes can be. So the purpose really is to be able to find the right combination of tools and processes that can allow you to be fast and furious, for lack of a better term, efficient and compliant, and of course be profitable and successful and happy. Right? Now, with the advent of technology in the legal tech, the legal technology is a great space today, especially for legal professionals, because there are many different newer technologies that are helping legal professionals be more efficient, be able to capture the day-to-day transactions as and when they happen. Because that's one of the most important aspects of that operational task, is how do I capture the moment and the data entry that needs to be done of all the transactions that your firm deals with, client-related, non-client-related, right? Now, with the advent of technology, including uLaw as an example, there are many tools out there that also allow you and give you the capability to docket your time using a mobile device. So no more are you dependent on having a slightly larger device, even if it's a laptop or an iPad or a tab. Today, with a majority of individuals using their phone or their smartphone as a way of dealing with their office, their mobile office, mobile docketing is only the next step in making that more efficient, right? So today in uLaw, for example, You can ensure that you can dock it when on the move. You can quickly import phone conversations, whether that's your iPhone or Android. If you've just made a phone conversation to your client, and if you think that's relevant to be docketed as time and effort, you can import that phone conversation right away into uLaw, saving you time, but also capturing the moment. You could docket email conversations that you've had originating from the mobile device. So if you actually go into ulawpractice contact, and if you click on the email icon, and if you dropped an email and send it out, uLaw will right away notify you and ask you, hey, would you like to docket that? Because it looks like you, and then you can say, yeah, I spent 5 minutes writing that email, and of course I'm going to docket that and charge him. Or maybe not, right? Another important aspect of the mobile landscape, really, for legal professionals, and of course it seems very high-tech and seems natural to have this at the same time, but it's only a matter of time before this becomes the normal, right? You're going to start to look at how the mobile technologies are going to revolutionize, where one day we believe a law firm or a legal firm could pretty much be running using a mobile device. But the aspect for today's context, 2019, is really having relevant information at your fingertips. So if you needed to really check how much does Joe Smith really owe you because you just met him at a Walmart, then you don't have to open up a laptop. You can basically just view that information right on your phone because it's more easily accessible. And last but not the least, of course, with the mobile device, you could start to also assess and analyze business information. Beyond file management, of course, a slight segue here, but within that landscape, you as a legal firm should be able to take advantage and also visualize all of the business numbers that keeps your firm alive and profitable. Okay? Just some quick screen grabs, if you will, of our actual mobile iOS, which of course tells you can quickly visualize that here by category you have the various different areas of practice that's fetching this firm revenue. So you can clearly see that you've got almost 21% coming from small claims, you've got about 37% miscellaneous, about 18% from general. And specific to this client, Adam Brown, Mr. Adam owes the firm $1,300 at this particular time, which they can easily recover, knowing that it hasn't been paid in over 30 days. Okay? All of that information is now available on the phone. So I'd like to take maybe the last 10 minutes to utilize uLaw as an example to show you the different documents and how easy it is to create it, but also the documents that you need to keep in mind as you go through the operational and tactical steps of managing a file. But prior to that, as we discuss in the landscape area, of course, about legal professionals of today needing to use the right tools and process, we highly recommend you exploring the purchase and the use of legal accounting software with embedded practice management, of course, but legal accounting at its core, because it saves you two important aspects of your business. One is the most fundamental and important is law society compliance. Documents that they ask you for, the audit readiness, the journals, ledgers are not sexy in any ways, but they're important because the data tells a story, and that's the story that the auditors are looking for, is are you complying with the guidelines and the rules of the book, okay? Are you transferring money and not misappropriating it? Because the numbers will tell the story. Because if you've just moved $1,000 of retainer money into your general account, of course that's frowned upon, and that tells a story, and it's not compliant, and of course the auditor is going to catch you upon that. What the auditor does as next steps is, of course, is left to the auditor. There are many different stories that we've heard, but bottom line is keeping compliance as a legal professional is a must to keep your license, and it's a must for you to continue down your dream of being a successful, profitable law professional, legal firm, right? The second important aspect of what the legal accounting does is being able to capture the moment. It's all those little things that all finally add up to ensuring that you're compliant. So capturing whether that's a docket that needs to be done right away, whether that's the invoice that needs to be generated right away, whether it's an office expense that needs to be captured or a disbursement that needs to be docketed or dispersed. All these different transactions are made easily available to be captured and converted into the appropriate documents that you require in the eyes of legal accounting software. Okay, because it does combine what the law society's aspects are, or the business accounting aspects are. Right? Good examples such as uLaw, PC Law is another good example of tools that are legal accounting software purpose-built for legal firms. And of course, you have to consider cost of ownership, which is what's the amount of money that you would have to spend as a legal firm to afford a legal accounting software. There's a few tools out there in the cloud. There are tools that are desktop-based. Whatever is convenient and whatever makes sense for your firm as a professional that you are, you would have to make that decision. But exploring tools such as this nature is important if you want to be efficient and looking forward. And of course, we're a very proud Canadian company and been in business for over 9 years, serving Canadian legal professionals. Do visit us on our website because we do offer you, like Netflix, a no obligation 30-day trial. To explore us, we'll do our best to give you all the information, and we'd love to serve you as our client, of course. So I'm going to quickly shift gears. I am going to stop sharing my presentation and start to share my uLaw screen. All right, so I'm logged into this fixture's legal professional, Mr. Roger Moore. I'm logged in as him using uLawpractice. And let's go through a simple example in the next 10 minutes about the different aspects of file management, the different documents that are involved, and quickly let's find out how we can do this in time. We spoke about this briefly. One of the fundamental first steps is that to create a client or the client intake, right? So let's start with that. I'm going to go into my contacts. I probably should annotate just to make it easier. Okay. So that happens. Let me just go ahead and say add to my clients group because I'm creating a new client. Sure. Peter Hawkins. We'll capture the source of contact, which is just a fast and easy way for you to know how did Mr. Peter Hawkins get to know the Roger Moore legal firm. Okay, maybe it was a community referral. Go ahead and a quick correspondence address. Maybe it's the home address. Go ahead and click the Save button. So you could have actually provided this phone number, email. You could have done the same thing using a mobile device today with uLaw, but I'm just doing this on a web version of it. The mobile device also allows you to do the same thing. You could take client intake, capture the moment right from your phone, and it enters into your main database. Okay, before I move on, there's one quick question around conflict screening. Okay, I think that's a great question about how often do I have to generate the conflict screening. Now, that's a good question. Most importantly, you would do a conflict screening before you create a file for a new client. Okay, so once you've actually done that the first time, you've clearly established that there are no conflicts. Now, if things do change and you didn't know about certain information, that's why it's important that we date and timestamp every conflict screening report. So when I go ahead and generate, I did mention this earlier when we started the webinar. Today's webinar is accredited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits. So I would repeat myself again. So it is for 1 hour of professionalism credits in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, and New Brunswick. So going back to the question, and maybe that's a logical next step. So right away, you could do a conflict check, right? So action, conflict check. You can check if you've got matters, if you've ever come across a Peter in other dockets, or you could do a simple check just for the name, right? When you're just getting started and you pretty much know there are no clients and you're just getting started, many times it's just the name. But if you're an established firm that's been in business for several years, then it makes more sense for you to also include matters and events, because you may have met with Peter Hawkins okay, it looks like I'm unable to share this document. Give me 1 second, please. I'm just going to share the entire screen so that you get to see this. So there you go. So you see, when I did the conflict check, it did bring up quite a bit of Peters. There's quite a few first names with start Peter. And important enough, there's actually a timestamp at the end of that document. So it says, as far as what the conflict check I did on the 27th of September, this is the information that I have. And this is what goes into the file before creating the file. So moving along to create the matter, and I really hope that answered the question. If you really wanted to create the next step, which is creating a file, you could click on the matter screen. Okay. Someone did ask me for me to open this document one more time. So what it does is I just check for first name and last name conflicts. So that's why it brings quite a few first names that start with Peter, Peter Hain, Peter Piper. And there's some last names like Ryan Peter or Peter Piper. Even when there's a double E, it says names that sound similar. So it also does a sounds like. Okay? All right. So for purposes of time, let's just say it's Peter versus Boris, small claims. And now as part of the file management, we spoke about how the files have to be uniquely numbered. uLaw pretty much does that. Legal accounting tools will do that for you, help you manage your own files that are unique. What uLaw does, of course, is it allows you to be cross-indexed, and all of this is done on the cloud. So you can access this information from any device as long as you have the internet connected. Right away, once you have the file, which is we pretty much have all of the letters, compliance documents as quick and easy buttons to click. So if you're really looking, if you're getting audited tomorrow, and if you've just created this file, you could just go ahead and click compliance, and pretty much generate the documents required. Right? So if you wanted a client ID verification document, as per the Law Society's guidelines, we generate that for you and pre-populate as much as information as you've already provided us with the name, address, etc. So that it's easier for you to make this as part of that digital repository. And you can save this right under the Documents tab of uLaw for that particular matter. Okay? Client intake form, we spoke about that briefly, but I'll skip that. I'll get right into the conflict screening report. And this is an important document. And this is where you clearly outline as to why you determined that Mr. Peter Hawkins was not a conflict. And you can use the conflict check that you did, this particular document, the conflict check document, as a supportive document to that claim. Okay? So here's my conflict screening report. And that was the conflict check. This is the conflict screening report. Okay? And you can clearly see it tells you who did the intake, right? So if this is a new client, you can say, yep, conflict search done. And you can actually add this document along with it to support it. And of course, you can clearly say there was no conflict, or there's a conflict, possible conflicts, whatever may be the situation. I did not refer the person to someone else, did not decline the retainer. Okay? So that's a conflict screening form, template provided by the Law Society. Of course, various life cycles and stages of this form, this file rather, you could have these different documents, but one of the next steps is that of a retainer letter. So let me go ahead and generate that. So we have a few samples that you could use if you're using contingency or other samples. I tend to use the flat rate or elaborate example. I can even generate this as a Word if I were to tweak it. I can even put my $1,000 retainer if I wanted. And once you actually have signed that retainer letter, that's when you get into the actual docketing of things, right? You're going to be docketing time and effort. So, and this is what I mentioned, each and every matter is very different. You can docket by the time, the agreement signed, bulletize it. And you could have spent 30 minutes and you may end up charging a billable time of 1 hour. Or maybe you spent 1 hour and you're charging them 1 hour at $400 an hour. You could do a court doc and charge them a flat rate of $100 instead of billable time. And you could have a disbursement. Let's add this first. Court forms filled out. Okay. So of course we're going to take 400 plus the 100, add the taxes based on the jurisdiction, of course. So absolutely, uLaw does do the conflict checks, as I've shown you. I think that's one of the questions we had. It does check for plaintiff defendants, and that's something I mentioned during the presentation. Once you have added the parties, so in the terms of additional parties, if let's assume this Peter is our plaintiff, and if you actually have added a defendant here, and say I'm going to add Mr. Boris. And the cool aspect of that is we actually give you the relationship that we've built. So let's say I've just added Mr. Boris Becker as the defendant. I could even add a legal representation for Boris. I could say representative of the opponent, which is really the name of the party provided. I could basically say that's Steffi Graf. So let's say Steffi is Boris's legal representative, and Roger Moore is now the representative of the plaintiff here, Mr. Peter, because that's the relationship that we've just built. When you do the conflict check, the next time you come and enter Boris, it's going to tell you that Boris Becker was a defendant in this matter, in the same form. It would show you at the bottom, it would say file or matters that associated with his information. Even so, if you look at this little tree structure that we've given you today, it tells you the different, how they're all related. Because this is a relatively newer feature. When you click on this little icon here, it tells you Mr. Roger Moore, his client is Peter Hawkins, and you've got Steffi Graf, who's the representative of the opponent, and her client is the defendant, Mr. Boris Becker. So clearly tells you, even if visually you have to represent this, what the relationships are, okay? Now where does this help? Again, court forms. If you're going to do a plaintiff's claim, right here, so if you want to go ahead and do a plaintiff's claim, of course we ensure that these forms are up to date with a certain SLA, of course. But let's say I do the Ottawa courthouse. So one, it helped you with your conflict check. Two, in the province of Ontario alone today, uLaw allows you to automate these court forms. Okay. So hopefully that established why you build the relationship of the parties. Twofold. One is the conflict check, very important. Other, if you're in the province of Ontario, then of course an added value to the product is that we do give you these court forms that are pre-populated based on the information that you already provided. Why retype all of that information all over again, right? Okay, so as that gets filled out, let me just go ahead and add a disbursement. I'm going to say pay from general. And let's say there's a court fee involved. We can go ahead and add that. Say pre-tax amount. I could say tax exempt. I'm just using the tab right now, so if you're someone who's used to that, you can do that. You can say paid to the Ministry of Finance. You can tell us how you paid for it. Maybe you paid this out of your general account, and maybe you wrote a check. You can even print that check if you like, but I'm just going to go ahead and create save. So docket, disperse, and then finally you generate the invoice. If you looked at all the documents that you send the client, you of course would have generated that retainer letter, got it signed from the client, of course before you deposited any retainer, and then you docket, disperse, and then generate the invoice. You add the retainer right here. I think that was the next question. Of the $1,000 that, let's say Peter Hawkins paid you using a check, goes into your trust account, and give them a receipt, very important document, and hit apply. So the bottom line is, as and when you generate all of those important documents along the way, it's compliant, also keeps you efficient because you must generate those documents to keep that business going, to keep that file alive. And of course, documents are what's going to help you to ensure that you can actually state what's rightfully yours and use it as a formal proof when you represent your client. Whether that's retainer agreements, receipts, invoices, all of these documents are important for your day-to-day operations, right? Even if you're running any other type of business. And here's an example of that court form. So it's got all of the information with regards to the party involved. So Peter Hawkins is the plaintiff. You can, of course, add multiple plaintiffs, defendant, and if you add the second defendant, they become part of your additional parties form. Keep in mind, this was all information that we previously stored under our contacts, and we repurposed those contacts as parties within the matter. And here's a retainer receipt for the $1,000 that Peter Hawkins just paid us. Let's invoice him real quick. We always recommend doing a preview or pre-bill, but for purposes of today's demo, I'm just going to go ahead and generate the invoice, which is yet another file-related document, more importantly, that you send to the client. Because only when you do that can you formally get paid or transfer the money that's rightfully yours from trust to general. Okay. I know I've gone slightly above my proposed time for the CPD. I'm just going to take 2 more minutes. And I got sidetracked because of the constant beeping. Yet another document that's file related. And this is just, again, the example of the retainer letter. And here's the invoice, right? So you can have your own logo, your own letterhead, etc. But this is an important document that should support the claim of your retainer letter. Court documentation, $100. You got $400 billed at an hour, plus charges, and the disbursements of $100, including telling you that you did receive the retainer, making it as paid, and saying that's the balance left in trust. And now once you've done that, an important step, part of your business keeping is in that file management is, of course, doing the trust transfer. Right? In real life, you would have to move that $665 worth that you've just earned yourself, because all that money was in trust. You generate the invoice and then move the appropriate pending money, what they call as pending trust transfer amount, or the eligible trust amount from the trust account into your general account or operating account. And if you're in the province of Ontario, if you do transfer that amount from a trust account to a general account, then you are required to fill out a Form 9A. Okay. This is how you tell us that how much you paid. We keep you compliant so you can't transfer anything over or not, right? Moving it from your trust account into your general. And if you're doing this in an electronic way, which is electronic bank, so just online, really. So you fill out the Form 9A. And this is yet another file management document because it's related to this matter. It's not a business management, it's file management documentation. So for Mr. Peter Hawkins, specific to this matter, PH 503519, specific based on the legal invoice 3127, you took the right or the liberty to transfer the amount of $665 from this TD account 123 trust account into this TD general account that ended with 6767. And you actually signed this. Okay? And of course, another document is if you have to provide this money back, there's another $335 worth money left into it. If you can refund that, not that you would, but if you do refund it, that's another document as part of the file keeping. Okay? So going back to the crux or importance of today's webinar is to, again, highlight the important documents and the chronological order in which you generate these documents, right from your retainer letter to, or the engagement letter to how you docket, disperse, invoice, do trust transfers. And once this particular matter has been closed, all of the closure letters that actually go along with it, all of that are important documents that you, again, including the settlement and the final statement of activities once you've completed the document, are all set of standard expected file management documents, both for file management purposes, client relation purposes, as well as at the end of the day, compliance purposes that convert into ledgers and journals. Okay? Because if you really look at it, there are statements, of course, specific to this matter. They all add up as being part of a trust ledger for the entire month for your business, but you have individual trust ledgers and journals for each and every matter that are important. So you can cleanly refund the retainer, write them a check for the $335, pay it back to Peter Hawkins, comes out of your trust account, print a check, generate a closing statement, a statement of activity, and close this matter. Keeping in mind that before you close the matter, ensuring that the projected balance is zero, because that gives you kind of a logical closure to the financial aspect of it. Okay? So generate a statement of activity, send it along with the final document. Tells you all the dockets, the work done. The bill of cost. Now, each matter may have its own nuance, so there are certain matters for which you can generate the bill of cost, certain matters you can generate the settlement statement. This tells you the legal fees, the disbursements involved, who was done by. So in certain matters, you may have multiple legal professionals involved, in which case we can also outline what those different legal professionals are, who they are, what their rates are, etc. And when you're ready, once you're done, you're basically just going to mark this as closed, and you're going to be done with this particular matter. Okay? So once again, I do thank everyone who joined me today for today's webinar. I do apologize that I did take a little bit longer than I usually do for these webinars. If there are any specific questions with regards to today's webinar, please feel free to email us at support@ulawpractice.com. Now, this webinar was approved for 1 hour of CPD credits for professionalism in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, and New Brunswick. It will be available to you for you to look at in our YouTube channel as early as Monday next week. And please feel free to send us your comments, any feedback that you have with regards to the webinar, any newer topics that you would like for uLaw Practice to cover as we go down this path of working with our legal clients and professionals to make this a very educative process. Thank you once again, and have yourself a fantastic weekend.